I can totally understand why you feel that way. That must have been really tough for you. I can imagine how that situation would make you feel. That sounds really frustrating. Wow, that must have been such a big moment for you. I completely see where you're coming from. That must have been overwhelming. How are you feeling now? That's such a relatable experience. I felt that way before too. I hear you. That's not an easy thing to go through. It makes total sense why you reacted that way. You're not alone in this. I think many people would feel the same way. That sounds like a lot to handle. You're doing great. I totally get why that would make you happy, sad, or frustrated. It's completely understandable that you feel this way. That's a really natural reaction. I can tell this means a lot to you. What you're saying makes so much sense. That sounds like such a difficult situation. Anyone in your position would feel that way. I completely respect your feelings on this. I can see why this would be a challenge for you. It must have taken a lot for you to share that. I really appreciate you opening up about this. That sounds like a really emotional experience. I can tell this situation is important to you. You're handling this better than most people would. That's a big deal. You're allowed to feel however you feel. I admire how you're dealing with this. I can see why this has been on your mind so much. That's a lot to process. Take your time. I know that wasn't easy, but you did great. It's okay to feel unsure about things sometimes. You're making a lot of sense, and I completely hear you. That must have been really stressful. You're stronger than you think. You'll get through this. That's a really valid concern. I would probably feel the same way if I were in your shoes. I can see why this is so important to you. It's okay to take a moment for yourself. That must have been such a mix of emotions for you. I get why that moment was so impactful for you. You're not alone in this, and I'm here for you. That was such a brave thing to do. I respect how you're handling this. You don't have to explain yourself. I understand. That must have been disappointing. I know this is difficult, but you're not alone. It's completely normal to feel that way. It makes sense that this affected you so much. You did the best you could in that situation. That sounds like it took a lot of courage. I can tell this experience shaped you in a big way. It must be exhausting to carry that weight. I can see how much effort you've put into this. I appreciate how honest you are about this. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough. You don't have to go through this alone. I know this isn't easy, but I believe in you. It's okay to feel conflicted about this. That must have been such an overwhelming experience. I appreciate you trusting me enough to share this. It's okay to feel like you don't have all the answers. That must have been a tough choice to make. You're not crazy for feeling this way. I respect your perspective on this. I can tell you've thought a lot about this. You've been so strong through this whole thing. That must have been incredibly frustrating. I admire your resilience. It's okay to need some time to figure things out. I can't imagine how hard that must have been. You have every right to feel the way you do. You're allowed to be upset about this. That must have been such a bittersweet moment. I appreciate how much effort you've put into this. That must have been really confusing at the time. You're handling this with so much grace. I completely understand your hesitation. That's a completely valid reaction. I see why this matters so much to you. You're not wrong for feeling this way. I know this situation isn't easy for you. It's okay to feel like this right now. That must have been a real test of patience. I know you're doing your best, and that's enough. It's okay if you don't have the right words to explain it. That must have been such an emotional moment. I can tell this situation has been weighing on you. You're being really strong by facing this head-on. It's okay to feel a little lost sometimes. That must have been tough, but I know you'll get through it. I really appreciate your honesty about this. You're handling this way better than I would have. That's completely understandable. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. I believe in you, no matter what. You deserve to be heard and understood. You've shown so much strength through all of this. I can tell you're putting a lot of thought into this. It's okay to take things one step at a time. I know you'll find your way through this. I completely understand why you feel this way. That sounds really challenging. I admire how you're handling it. You're not alone in this. I'm here for you. That must have been really frustrating. I can only imagine how difficult that must have been for you. You've been dealing with so much. I respect your strength. It makes sense that you'd feel that way. I hear you. That's not an easy thing to go through. I can see why this is so important to you. That must have taken a lot of courage to share. I appreciate your honesty. That's not always easy. Your feelings are completely valid. That must have been really overwhelming. I can tell this means a lot to you. It's okay to feel this way. Anyone would in your situation. I respect how much thought you've put into this. That must have been such a tough moment for you. I admire the way you're handling this situation. You've been through a lot. It's okay to take your time. I completely get where you're coming from. That must have been disappointing. You're doing the best you can, and that's enough. I can tell how much you care about this. That must have been emotionally exhausting for you. You've shown a lot of strength in dealing with this. That must have been a really difficult decision to make. It's okay if you don't have all the answers right now. I know this must be weighing on you. I appreciate you trusting me enough to share this. I respect your perspective on this. That must have been a really bittersweet moment. You're handling this with so much grace. That must have taken a lot of patience. I can see how much this has affected you. You don't have to go through this alone. You deserve to feel heard and understood. I completely understand why this would bother you. That must have been a really eye-opening experience. You've put in so much effort. I admire that. I can tell you've been thinking a lot about this. That's a lot to process. Take your time. I know this hasn't been easy for you. You have every right to feel the way you do. It's okay to not be okay sometimes. That must have been really confusing at the time. I can tell how much this situation means to you. You're doing better than you think. I appreciate how open you are about this. It makes sense why this is affecting you so much. That must have been a really emotional moment for you. I completely respect how you feel about this. You've been so strong through all of this. You don't need to have it all figured out right now. That must have been such a tough lesson to learn. I admire your resilience. You're being really strong by facing this head-on. I know how hard this must be for you. You're handling this with so much maturity. That must have been a difficult thing to experience. You're not wrong for feeling the way you do. That must have been a huge moment for you. You're allowed to feel however you feel. I know this situation has been really tough on you. It's okay to take a break and take care of yourself. That must have been a really complicated situation. I appreciate you sharing this with me. I can tell this has been on your mind a lot. That must have been a tough conversation to have. It's completely understandable that you reacted that way. I can see why you've been feeling this way. That must have been an intense experience for you. It's okay to feel conflicted about this. That was such a brave thing to do. You're handling this better than most people would. You've been through a lot, and you're still standing. I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you. You deserve to take the time you need to process this. That must have been a really personal experience. I know this hasn't been easy, but you're doing great. That's a completely valid reaction. I admire your ability to stay strong through this. You're making so much progress, even if it doesn't feel like it. You're showing a lot of courage in handling this. It's okay to feel unsure about what comes next. That must have been a turning point for you. You don't need to apologize for feeling the way you do. That must have taken a lot of strength to get through. You're not being dramatic. This is a big deal. That must have been an incredibly tough moment. I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable about this. That must have been a real test of patience. You're stronger than you think, even if you don't feel like it. That must have been really heartbreaking. I can tell you're doing your best. You're not alone in this. Don't forget that. That must have taken a lot of emotional energy. I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm proud of you. You're handling this situation with so much wisdom. It's okay to take things one day at a time. I see the effort you're putting in, and it's inspiring. That must have been really painful, but you're not alone. I know this will take time, and that's okay.